All right, guys, welcome to the How They Did It podcast. I'm here with Value Stock Geek. That's his Twitter handle. I've been a subscriber of his Substack for a long time. He's the creator of the Weird Portfolio, something we're really going to try to dig into today. Generally, I'm super duper excited to have him on. I really think that if you're a long term value investor and you're trying to invest in the larger cap companies, it's one of the best Substacks to read and easy to understand. Generally use SV VSG. I'm trying to use a good acronym. As a sobering words for people in need as far as their finances. So I'm very excited to have him here. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So first things first. I wanted to dive into what brought you into the finance world because you have a story that I think is very interesting, and I think the hardships and the difficulties you went through early in your journey through finance is something a lot of people can learn from.
Yeah, I got really interested in finance in high school back in the late 90s. I had saved up some money mowing lawns and stuff, and I was excited with what was happening in the market, and that's what got me going early on and got me interested in it. And then I was fortunate enough to read Ben Graham near the peak of that bubble, and then that convinced me to sell and get out of some of that stuff. Then I went to college, and in my 20s, I did have some difficulties with debt and things like that. I got out of that, and then by my early 30s, I had saved up some substantial money where I could really start to get more serious with investing, and then it kind of turned from more of a more casual interest into something that I was much more serious about. And I was trying to apply those principles for value investing with my personal savings. And then I guess over the last decade, things have just evolved from there, where I've refined my approach and I've learned a lot of things, mainly through experience.
Uh, to stick in the on the finance part for now, I wanted to ask, when you got into debt, what was it that helped you get out of debt? 'Cause I know a lot of people personally that are struggling with this right now. Like they're in their 20s, they probably have a lot of student loans, they take on some debt to buy a car. What was there any kind of approach that you used to help you get through that first initial stage?
I used the debt snowball. So at the time, this was like 2008. The economy was falling apart, and a lot of the people I worked with were much older, and I saw that they were really in tons of mortgage debt. They were in houses they couldn't afford. They had tons of credit card debt. I saw them struggling to make ends meet. Then the financial crisis came along, and everybody was worried about losing their jobs. And like I could just see the stress that they were going through. You know, most of them were in like their 40s and stuff. And then I saw the path I was on, where I had tons of credit card debt and car payments, and I was living, kind of that normal American lifestyle. And I just saw, like, oh my God, I'm headed in that same direction. And I did not want that to happen to me. So, to get out of debt, I used the debt snowball. That's where I started. I think Dave Ramsey gives pretty good advice for at least the first few baby steps. I think he's wrong about things when you go beyond that with investing. But those first few baby steps, I think, make a lot of sense, where he encourages people to get, like, first a starter emergency fund going, where you basically save up. He recommends $1,000 in cash. You probably should get a little bit more than that these days, but that's what I did back then. I basically sold junk I had on eBay to get the first amount of cash in, and that's like your starter emergency fund. Then you list all your debts from smallest to biggest, and then you tackle the smallest ones first. That doesn't make a lot of mathematical sense. So, if you were to do it in like the mathematical optimal way, you would probably tackle the highest interest rates first. But by tackling the smallest ones first, what that does is it gives you kind of psychological momentum where you're saying, like, hey, I had this $500 card with this store and I knocked that out pretty quick. And that gives you like a quick win. You're like, all right, I'm on the right track here. I've eliminated one of these debts. It also frees up cash flow quicker. So, okay, you had this $500 debt that might have been like a $20 payment. All right, well, now you've got another $20 that you can put towards the next debt. And then over time that accumulates. And yeah, it took a while, but yeah, within like 2 to 3 years, I'm guessing. I should have kept closer track of it. But yeah, within 2 to 3 years, I had everything paid off, car, credit cards, and I was totally out of debt. And then the next step after that is you save up 6 months worth of cash. That took me a few months, and I had 6 months worth of cash saved up. And yeah, and then I was already in that kind of super frugal saving lifestyle. So from there, I just quickly kind of accumulated some money where now I was like, okay, now I'm going to get back into investing. And then I started to take that interest much more seriously. But yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to just the key thing is to just first of all get fed up with it. Say like I'm not going to go into debt anymore. I'm not going to spend money I don't have. I'm going to live beneath my means rather than kind of chasing uh, that American that American lifestyle where you're just pushing for more, 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 and nothing is ever enough. And the consequence of that is you wind up spending your whole life in chains. You're just all your paychecks are going to a bunch of banks, and that totally sucks. And you accumulate no wealth.
Yeah, luckily I never have had too much debt, but I've been in a little bit of debt. And I had the issue that because for many, many years I was a professional fighter. And as a professional fighter, you're not really making significant paychecks, and they're very few and far between, even when they do happen. And so I was trying to work regular jobs as much as I could to just make ends meet. And I really never had any savings. I never had anything that felt stable. I was basically living just from one day to the next. And I remember at some point it was that it's like I was like I'm kind of fed up. Like I had like a few grand in credit card debt, which wasn't too crazy, but I was like I need to make changes to my life, even though it doesn't feel like this will ever amount to anything significant because I'm making so little money. I'd rather even save the little bit of money I have it somewhere to start, and it actually that psychological momentum really does help.
Yeah, and I mean you can get to a really good place. So, like I remember back then, I used to always be worried like, "Oh my god, what if I lose my job and I won't be able to make any ends meet and I'll be in so much trouble." But now, I mean, I've got my expenses so low. I've got my money saved up. Financial independence is very close. It's within reach. Um and then on top of that, it's just like you just have a different attitude. It's like, all right, your boss pisses you off. All right, so what? Like, I can get a new job. Oh, there's layoffs coming. So what? I'm fine. I got enough money and my expenses are low enough where that's not a big deal. And it's just like such a liberating approach versus the other approach where you're just spending every dime that you have and you just live in a constant state of stress. And that can happen to you at any income level. Like there are rich people on Wall Street making tons of money and they need that job. They can't afford to lose that job. They have their kids in private schools. They've got an expensive, they've got a vacation home. They've got a penthouse in the city, blah, blah, blah. Like, and, you can have rich people living paycheck to paycheck, and you can have very poor people living paycheck to paycheck. And either way, it totally sucks. Like, you're a prisoner to your job, and that's no way to live.
Yeah, that's always been my biggest, most terrifying thing. Is I've always thought like I wanted to get to a place has always been my goal, and still is my goal. And I'm closer to it now than I've ever been. But it's always been my goal to be in a place that, if I ever wanted to quit my job, I could. I could. I would feel very comfortable quitting my job, and not quitting and being like, yeah, I quit because I'm upset at the boss, but how the fuck am I going to pay my rent the next few months? Like, I don't know what's going to happen now. Like, I always want to be in a place that, I quit my job, and even if I don't get a job for another year, I'm just fine. And maybe even at some point, I can even consider retirement because I've planned it out so well, even if it was earlier than I was planning on retiring.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the right approach. And I mean, I remember back during the financial crisis at my job at the time, we were almost being exploited by our employer. Like our employer knew, hey, there's no jobs out there, unemployment is going through the roof. So, you guys are. We need you to stay till like 10 o'clock tonight, clearing these issues. Like, and everybody had no choice. It was like, oh well, we're all living paycheck to paycheck. We all know there's no other jobs out there, and you're just stuck. And man, that is a terrible place to be. And after going through all that, I'm like, this is never going to happen to me again. This sucks.
Yeah, no doubt. That just sounds terrible. It sounds. I've been. I remember I lived in Greece, 2014, during when they had they were going through the austerity,
Mm-hmm.
and I was talking with people in Greece, and they were telling me like, oh, now our boss is now they're telling us we need like a 45% pay cut, and yeah, we got to work more hours, and there's absolutely nothing we could do about it. We're stuck. That's just this is what we have to do. This is the new reality. And I was like, that's horrifying.
Yeah. And if you're spending everything you have and you have no savings and no investments and you're completely 100 and you need 100% of that income coming in consistently, you're just setting yourself up to fail because problems on the personal finance front are almost inevitable. Employers are going to go out of business, economic crises are going to happen, and you want to be in a strong position where when stuff happens, you're set up. You're good to go.
Yeah, it's another thing I've been thinking about. I was thinking about the general culture of today. I mean, even me. I'm not saying, and it kind of worked out for me. So I have a funny perspective. Like I've been hearing. I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, you could do whatever you want to do," and then when they get to college, they're like looking for their passion, and they're looking for their job to be this great, deep, passionate joy, and then they quit a bunch of jobs, and they don't know where they're going with. And I see kids that could have had like been in a position, they're in their 30s, and they had just stuck with the job that they were pretty good at, that did, didn't make them miserable, but they were well equipped, that they could have been at this point in a place where they're super secure with, a bunch of assets under their name, and now they're kind of in their 30s, like still considering, which is the way to go. And that happened to me. I just, luckily, at 30, I kind of picked up steam immediately onto the next part of my life. But yeah, chasing the dream, it did actually, like, I did get to the point that I was 29 years old, 30 years old. I'm like, well, I don't have any money. I don't have anything. Like, I got a lot more years ahead of me.
Yeah, that's one of the lies that's been told to Gen X and millennials, I think, where we've always been told, like, hey, pursue your passion and everything will just work out. And that's not really reality. Like, you need a job, you need a good income, you need to make sure that you're not going into massive amounts of debt to get there. Like, everybody is, like, it's a common thing now for people to just take on like $100,000 worth of debt and take on a major that's not necessarily going to be that lucrative and then just assume everything's going to work out because they're pursuing their passion. Like, no, you need to have like a realistic plan. Like, what's the plan? Like, what's the job going to be? And then you also have to kind of accept that like work sucks and that's why we get paid to go there. Like, you're not going to find something where every minute is totally enjoyable. Like, there's going to be some struggle.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Like, I'm quite lucky. I basically have a bunch of jobs now as I work, but my jobs generally are stuff that they're not I find myself very lucky, fortunate, the jobs that I do. But still, there's no point. There's nothing that's 100% good. Like my wife, if you ask her, my job is a torture. It just depends who you're asking.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not saying like just take anything for the highest paycheck, but I am saying like look at your skills, have like a realistic plan, like not just I'm going to roll the dice and see what happens, which is what I think most people do. Like I do think most people like high school kids should be thinking about, hey, what's the job going to be? How much is it going to pay? How much debt do I need to go in to get there? Like, I don't think enough people are really having those conversations. Like, when I was in high school, it was just, hey, what are you interested in? Take on whatever amount of debt you want to get there. And that's not really a good plan.
Yeah, another thing I think that happens, especially I come from a bit of a lower income situation. I a lot of times like you the idea of being really wealthy but not being wealthy, famous type wealthy doesn't seem realistic. It doesn't seem attractive being the guy that owns three car dealerships, and you're making $300,000-400,000 a year, and it's a great it's a great life. But when you're young and you don't really get to see the people around you doing that, it seems like that's as far fetched as me becoming the next UFC world champion. Like they're both just two far fetched ideas. I might as well chase this hyper goal. When the other one's actually a lot more attainable, at least on maybe not to that level, but it's a lot more attainable. It's like there's a lot less people going for just that niche.
Yeah, plus I think when you set realistic goals, you're more motivated to pursue them. Like if your goal is some pie in the sky wild idea, you're not really going to there's not a concrete plan to get there. But like if you when you start to have goals that you realize are achievable, I think that really changes your whole mindset. And you can really start to see, like, oh, I see the plan. I see how this can actually happen. And I think that really motivates people to push.
I agree. So to move on to the next thing, I know that I'm a big fan. This is actually how I originally found you was through the weird portfolio. I read somebody write, I don't remember where I read an article about the weird portfolio. I don't think it was actually written by you. It was written by somebody else. Uh, and I thought I was looking for a way to invest because I invested. So basically, give you a little backstory. I originally invested. I'm going to use that in quotations. My first investment was I'd given $1,500 in cash to one of my friends who was mining Bitcoin like back in 2013 or something around there. And at some point when I was complaining to him about that I'm having financial troubles, he's like, "Well, do you want me to sell off your piece of your piece of my general portfolio?" I'm like, he's like, you have X amount of dollars. I'm like, "What do you mean?" I said, "I gave you like 1,500." He's like, "Oh no, that's worth this now." And I was like, "Well, I didn't do anything though. I didn't work. I didn't do anything. No job. It's just there." He's like, "Yeah." And then I started looking up investing, and because I didn't understand cryptocurrency, and it seemed speculative to me. I then went and looked up who's the world's greatest investor, found Warren Buffett, and that's what kind of led me down this journey that I'm on. Halfway through that journey, I also started to realize that most likely I'm not going to be able to beat the index fund. So I need to, in the best, worst case scenario, I need to at least have a separate like our Roth IRA account where I'm investing in index funds, and then leave the other stuff you know, for my little more riskier bets with the companies I'm trying to find.
Yeah, I think that's a good approach. And I went through a similar journey in developing the weird portfolio where originally I was more focused on like single stocks and creating single stock portfolios, which I'm still into. But I started to realize there are a lot of drawbacks to that approach. Like I noticed that a lot of my results at the time were basically resembling the returns on a small cap value index fund. And I also realized that while value is great, it doesn't really protect you when there's a serious drawdown like a 2008 or a 1973 74. I also realized that basically all asset classes go through these periods where they could have like a 10-year period where they don't make any money. So that really set me on a path where I wanted to find a more realistic approach that would be a little bit more consistent. And that led me into learning more about asset allocation. And like the basic asset allocation I started with was Harry Brown's permanent portfolio, which is 25% stocks, 25% long term treasuries, 25% cash, and 25% gold. And that doesn't beat the market over time. It doesn't even meet the market's return. But what it does is it provides a very like consistent and reliable rate of return without a lot of stress. And that as a base, I basically took that and then I developed my own approach, where my approach is 20% US small cap value, 20% international small, 20% real estate, 20% gold, and 20% long term treasuries. And that creates a pretty consistent rate of return over the long run. So I developed that where it's more aggressive than the permanent portfolio. It's internationally diversified. It has a pivot to value, which will hopefully help it avoid those large cap bubbles. And then it has those defensive assets in there with gold and treasuries, where they should provide some stability to the portfolio if we ever have like a major economic crisis, which will undoubtedly pummel value, but those assets should do okay. And that was really like a revelation for me when I really started researching asset allocations and started researching the long-term rates of return, where I always thought that like the only approach was to just take on max risk with stocks and basically accept that you're going to lose 50 to 60% every once in a while. And when I realized that there are kind of more stable approaches to growing your wealth, um, using these asset allocation strategies, it was really just a revelation for me when I realized that, oh, well, there's a smoother path to doing this where you don't have to necessarily be as stressed out every time that there's a big financial crisis.
Yeah, it's something that I've been considering, and I'm actually at the point right now where I'm considering how I actually want to construct my less risky assets that I have. So like what because I have at this point I basically used I started out when I first started, I didn't know anything about asset allocation at all. So when I first started and I got a bit nervous, I went in, I just bought the S&P 500 and I was
Mm-hmm.
dollar cost averaging in the S&P 500 for a while. Then I added some long-term treasuries to the mix. And recently I started adding some small cap value into it as well. And I'm considering adding gold, but I'm trying to figure out exactly which would work best for me, like which allocation would fit best for me.
Yeah, and that's a good mindset to take. So I mean, every asset class isn't for everybody. Like if you really just think gold is just yellow rocks and it's garbage, then don't invest in it. It's not necessarily for everybody, but yeah, I mean, the nice thing about today is that you have tools out there like a portfolio visualizer, which is free, and portfolio charts, and you can go in and you can back test it and you can look at the different combinations of assets and what they do and what periods they perform in, and you can make a more resilient portfolio. And there's no right portfolio for everybody. Like some people might be more concerned about controlling drawdowns. Some people might not think stock factors are necessarily going to work, like value. Some people aren't going to think gold is a worthwhile investment. But regardless of what your philosophy is, like there's no right portfolio for everybody. Go in, take a look, learn about it, back test it, see the different combinations of things that you can do, and then you can make a portfolio that works for your personality and your risk tolerance.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I really like the weird portfolio. I have I remember when I first saw it, I was thinking that I also wanted a little bit of exposure to the S&P 500 just from the standpoint of the consistent returns the S&P 500 has done over the past few hundred years, and I get the upside. I do get the downside of when these big bubbles pop, but I do get the upside of when these bubbles are going up as well. And I can trim some of that portfolio to put it, trim some of my S&P 500 and put it into my other portfolios, like the value stocks or the other funds, like the value or the gold or the long-term treasuries, whenever it's blowing up. So I wanted a little bit of taste of that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, the S&P 500 is fine. Like over the long run, that's going to make money. It does go through these bubbles where occasionally you'll have like the S&P 500 is basically large cap growth. That's pretty much what it is all the time. So, and large cap growth does give a return over the long run, but it does go through these intense bubbles and at times where you had like the Nifty 50 in the 70s, you had the internet bubble in the late 2000s. But hey, if you have got like a 30-year time horizon, it's probably going to work out. A pretty interesting portfolio that I thought was pretty interesting for accumulation that's been talked about by a guy I had on my podcast, Frank Vasquez, but it's like where an accumulation portfolio is half large cap growth and half small cap value. So they kind of work as like a yin and a yang. Like usually when small cap value is working, large cap growth isn't, and vice versa. So that's a pretty interesting approach there where you have like half of it in large cap growth, half of it in small cap value. And then that's a high risk portfolio that's going to have drawdowns in like a 2008 situation, but it's also kind of a portfolio that should help hopefully avoid major lost decades like the 2000s.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I actually heard the podcast, that podcast with Frank recently. I was also listening to it. So just to pivot on to the next part, you have the Substack and you invest in individual companies. I actually had one question because you, like me, I believe, have a job outside of investing. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So one thing I have found as a bit of a struggle is, the time management and how much effort it takes to, especially with my job, it's a lot of travel, but the general time management, how much effort and time it takes to get, through these companies individually. But I see that you write once a week, about once a week, on a new company, and I wanted to see like what's your process with that? How much time do you dedicate? Any tricks of the trade that you would like to share?
Yeah, so my current approach actually comes from time management. That's like a major consideration of mine. So I used to do a lot of deeper value stuff. And the struggle there was and it was highly diversified. Like I would have a 30 stock portfolio. I would be digging into these companies all the time. I'd be running screens all the time. And it's a lot of work because basically with deep value stuff, when the company hits intrinsic value, you got to sell. When there's potentially a problem with the company, you might have to get out quickly. Often you have to really keep tabs on this and you have to keep a major focus on it. So it was a major time commitment to keep up with 30 stocks, to constantly be evaluating new stocks. And I do have a full-time job, so I didn't really have the time to do that. And it was extremely stressful. And they're also super cyclical. So I was always obsessed with macro and like, are we going to have a recession this year? Because I'm going to lose 60% if we do. And after that, like, especially after COVID, I realized like this isn't working for me. So that I gravitated towards more higher quality companies. So the idea there is I can have a more concentrated portfolio, but they're in better businesses where it doesn't matter where we are in the economic cycle, where I'm pretty confident that I could just kind of coffee can the position for 10 years and it would work out okay. And that has helped me manage the time. So where I'm planning on holding positions for longer periods of time. The approach I took there was more of like, well, I want to be able to know what I want to own before there's a crash or before there's some market disruption. So the approach I take is once a week I go through a new company. Basically, I'll spend like an hour every day throughout the week. So I'll put in like 5 hours is kind of what I at bare minimum commit to of research. So and I'll do that like at nights or in the mornings. And then over the weekend, I'll put in like another, I'd say 4 hours of looking into the company. So every week I'm doing like a deep dive into a company, and I'm trying to determine, like, is this a wonderful company that you could hold for 10 years in coffee can? And then I'm adding it to my watch list. And then the idea is I have this watch list of really high quality businesses that you can hold for a long period of time. And then when they get cheap, I'll buy them. And I find it's a much less stressful approach than what I was doing before.
Yeah, yeah. I've had similar thoughts about it, especially recently. I started running money for my clients. Basically, they at some point they saw that I was getting into investing, and they were joking around, making jokes about me. Come on, Warren Buffett, give us a stock. That's not exactly how that's the approach I'm taking, but they were just messing with me. And at some point, there was one security that I was like, "Listen, guys, actually, like they were bothering. Like I'm like, actually, I think that this company right here is quite cheap, and I think if you guys get in now, over the long haul, it will be a good bet. It's something I'm personally getting into." I told them, and they did it. One of my clients did it, and he ended up. The stock actually had a quick rebound, and it went up, and he sold. Like once it got to a certain point, just sold. He's like, "Oh man, we made all this money. That was great. Give me another one." And I'm like, "Well, that's not really how this works, But like I really still like that company. I still don't think it's that expensive, even now it's had this like turnaround. I still think it's in a good place. I'm still holding. I haven't planned on holding. Not planning on selling for years, but yeah, I think that it's still a good company. He bought it again, and it did another bump, and during the second bump, he sold again quickly once it got up to like a point that he was just happy, he made a bunch of money. He's like, "Oh man, I did it again." He's like, "That's great." And then they called me on my birthday last year and like, "Listen, here's some money. We're putting it in this account. We want you to manage it for us from now on." I'm like, "Oh, you guys really jumping the gun here." I was like, "Agree to this." But yeah, so I've been working with that, and because I've been putting in so much more effort, I've been trying to find ways. And still, I have to do my regular job and all my and the travel and everything else I do. I'm trying to find ways to manage my time efficiently and like where I spend my time when I'm researching. So like I've gotten better at reading annual reports quicker, kind of learning like where's the important parts to focus on. Um, I have more websites where I can go to get information from quickly to triangulate information. But yeah, I always am looking for more tips to become more efficient while I'm doing this so I can, one, be able to avoid making any mistakes and still have the proper research.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for me, the solution was just to focus more on these higher quality businesses, kind of accepting that I'm not going to have the kind of returns you'd get in deep value. Like, I think if you're going for, like, I'm going to do my maximum possible CAGR, the place to go is deep value, but the price to be paid for that is it's tons of work and a lot of volatility, and you need like an kind of an iron stomach to be able to deal with things like when you own like a bunch of super cyclical businesses and then the economy looks like it's about to fall off a cliff. You need to be able to like push through it and hold it, and that's much harder in reality than it is in a back test.
Oh, 100%. Like, at some point I had read The Acquirer's Multiple, which I really loved, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this approach is like fit for me. I'm like, it's 30 stocks, low EV/EBIT. I get it, simple, easy. I could do this, no problem. But in practice, as I started trying to accumulate, I was just thinking, man, this is going to be such a wild ride. And you're gonna, and you know that right now. I read the book. I'm confident. I feel good. But I know once everything starts going crazy, and you start hearing other people go, "Oh, deep value's dead. It's no longer working. Here's a 10-year stretch of no money, or you're losing money." I'm like, I don't know if I truly have the stomach for it.
Yeah. And the other side to that too is that those strategies are now available in ETF form. So you could do like the quantitative value ETF from Alpha Architect. Tobias runs two ETFs, Deep, which is like the small and micro version of the acquires multiple, and then there's Zig, which is the larger cap version. And then there's just small, if you want to really just pump the brakes on it, you could go small cap value ETFs. And it's much easier to just buy an ETF than it is to actually manage 30 positions. You can just outsource that strategy to someone else. And honestly, you'll probably get very similar returns. Like there's that, that macro allocation principle where you're pretty much going to get the returns of the asset class that you're exposed to. So you might as well just buy the asset class, is kind of my conclusion. And it's much more, and if it's in a taxable account, much more tax efficient to do it in an ETF versus to be constantly flipping positions and paying taxes on gains and trying to handle all that. Like you can just hold it in the ETF, the tax, and then just pay the taxes when hopefully decades later you actually sell the ETF.
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of in my that's kind of where I landed. I landed in two areas. Like I said, well, what I'll do is since I kind of have an interest in investing and it also helps me learn about businesses. I've also invested in my own private business. It's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school in Miami, Florida. I have my own training business that I'm training people under at the moment. So I'm interested as a business owner and learning more. And I felt like my travel through investing has made me a better business person, a better business owner,
Mm-hmm.
and my and vice versa. As I go become as I'm dealing with more stuff in my personal businesses, I think it's making me a better investor. Um, so I allocate some of my money towards the again I'm not like one side. I don't only do small cap or only large cap, but I try to find like companies that I feel are quite secure, that a similar approach to your checklist. Like I want to make sure I can hold them for 10 years. I want to make sure their management is reputable. I want to make sure that they have a great return on invested capital, that they're not at risk of going bankrupt, that they're not they're not doing anything fraudulent. That they're generating free cash flow, their earnings are growing, and I try to keep it simple and easy.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach and similar to what I do. So I've got my asset allocation on one side, and then I keep looking in the stocks on the other side, mainly because I love it. I think it's a lot of fun. I think I learn a lot. And, I think that the returns are there. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be. So many people think it's like a binary choice. Like you've got to do the index funds and an asset allocation, or you have to do stocks. I say, you can do both. Like you can have kind of some safe cash set aside and okay, I'm investing that in a stable asset allocation. And then you can still go for it with your active account. And that's pretty much where I've landed too.
Yeah, it's where I think is the best way to go about it from a personal perspective and from the perspective of the fund. I'm still trying to keep things very safe. Like my goal, like I even told my clients, I'm like, look, I don't know what you guys have in your head is what you think is going to come out of this, but my goal is in 10 years from now, you guys didn't lose any money. We made returns and maybe we don't beat the market, and maybe we do, but if we can match the market and or we do a little bit better, knowing that these guys aren't going to invest in the index funds because it's too boring for them, uh, they're,
Yeah.
I'm like this. I feel like we're a success.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I mean, I think a conservative approach to risk is super important because, bottom line, you can't compound from zero. So if you have great returns for 10 years and you're just doing it with hyper amounts of risk, whether it's leverage, whether it's just the riskiness of the strategy itself, whether it's extreme concentration, and you blow up, then okay, 10 years of gains just wiped out. Now you're starting from zero again. And the most powerful thing about compounding is that snowball effect, where over time it's accumulating and it's building. And you don't want to have a strategy so risky that there's a risk it can blow up. Because if there's a risk it can blow up, it's going to blow up at some point, and you are starting over again from zero.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, 100%. And that's kind of it. And actually, I heard Tobias talk about how he stopped shorts in his ETF because of that reason. Because he's like, I just want to avoid the risk of going to zero. As long as I survive, I know I'll be okay. And I remember hearing that from Tobias in one of his podcasts, and I was like, oh, that clicked to me. I was like, okay, all I gotta do is survive. Like that seems doable to me. Like I could do that. I can survive. I can not make crazy moves. Okay, this is a doable strategy for
Yeah, shorts can definitely get wiped out, and it's really I think it's really challenging to do that with value based shorts because like a market environment, like once the market is bidding up garbage, garbage can go who knows how high it's going to go, and the market can get completely irrational. And if you're short, you're going to get wiped out at some point. And if you're just kind of long value, you can wait out periods of time like that. But if you're short, you're just getting smacked on both ends. Your longs aren't working, and your shorts are getting crushed because everybody's bidding up all of this garbage. So yeah, that's definitely a difficult game to play.
me. Yeah, it's too much of a game to play for me too. All right, so I know that I've kept you, and by the way, I want to say thanks for everyone listening. You guys don't know, but I tortured VSG here. I tried to get him on a call. The Wi-Fi wasn't working.
No problem. No problem. No big deal.
It was a massive pain in the ass, and I really appreciate he was a great sport. He came on, he just worked with me, and I know it's early in the morning over there, so I'm not going to keep you much longer. I have one last question for you. You recently on your Substack, you did a write up on this packaging company.
Hmm.
I really liked it. I'm gonna start actually downloaded their annual report today. Couple of their annual reports, and I'm gonna try to find their competitors' annual report so I can read into it. I'm gonna start digging in myself. I really, really enjoyed it. How did you find that company?
So that's just me going through companies one at a time. I do look at like different ETF holdings. That's like one of the ways I can find things. I look at quality ETFs, I look at value ETFs, and then I just kind of pick one out once a week. And I'm like, okay, here's what I'm going to look into this week. Usually the conclusion is, and usually I take a quick look at the financials, and I'm like, okay, does this look like it might be quality? Does it look like it might be value? To try to decide like, is this actually interesting? Most of the time the things I'm looking at are like, oh, this is a really high quality business, but it's super expensive.
Yeah,
Packaging Corp, um, it just happened to be where, hey, this is actually looks to me like it's a decent price right now, and it looks like a very high quality business, so I bought it. Um, Basically, um, they're a box manufacturer, and there's only like four major box manufacturers in the United States, and Packaging Corp appears to be the best in class of them. Um, Basically, they're what's happening is the industry has consolidated. It's down to a small number of players, so they're not. It's not as ultra competitive as it used to be. With boxes, there's a value to weight ratio where it's not profitable for foreign competitors to ship boxes to the United States. It makes sense to do it locally. Packaging Corp also makes a lot of like custom boxes and things like that. And then on top of that, they have a very regional focus. So they're spread out throughout the continental United States. And a lot of times they're dealing with a direct regional customer so they can get the goods to them same day. Like, for instance, like if you're running like a kind of same day inventory system, you can get your boxes that day and ship everything out. So it's a pretty resilient business. And then just like high level, industry level, over time, are we going to use more boxes or less? And I think the answer to that is unquestionably like it's going to grow over time. Now, it's going to get smacked around if we have a bad recession, but that's not the game I'm really playing anymore, where I'm not trying to predict macro. Maybe we'll have a recession, maybe we won't. But I'm pretty confident that Packaging Corp's going to do okay over time, and I think I got it at a pretty attractive price, and I'm going to see how it works out from here.
yeah. I mean, that sounds great. And when I read your write up, I was really excited to dig into the company. I'm gonna go looking the I didn't know that about the boxes. I remember you probably wrote it in the write up, but as I was reading it, it skipped my mind. But I didn't know that the shipping boxes from overseas, the weight ratio makes it unprofitable. That's very interesting because that was the only thing for some reason that clicked in my head. I don't know why I didn't digest it when I read the write up. But yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a big advantage. And you would think like boxes are a super are just a commodity business, and I was really surprised to learn that it wasn't. Like I was looking at these results from Packaging Corp over the last like 20 years. Like that's what I usually do. I go to one of the tools I use is QuickFS, so I'll go there, I'll download like 20 years of financials, and I was kind of amazed at how good the picture looked considering the industry that it was in. And I started to do a deeper dive, and I was pleasantly surprised as I started to learn about it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, VSG, I really appreciate you coming on. This is the How They Did It podcast, episode 9. We appreciate you. Thanks for adding all the knowledge to us. As a young investor, I'm going to keep reading your Twitter. I'm going to stay on your Substack. I really highly recommend anyone that's in the game, especially for retail investors that they want to play the long game, which I think is a game you should be playing. Highly recommend you go on the Substack. You learn a lot. Simple, easy to read. It's great stuff. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it.